House Apartment, The Bothy, Long Lane, Little Shagthorne. Dear Irene, I was going through some drawers in the coach house yesterday and came across my old and dog-eared list of new millennium resolutions. My first instinct on reading "Must be more tolerant of Irene, she means well even though she is very trying," was to tear it into little tiny pieces. But I found myself reading on, and by the time I came to "I will embrace my fellow man with love and friendship," I was bathed in tears. I sat on the bed and howled. My veterinarian son-in-law, St. John, said later he thought it was a poodle he'd just castrated. It brought back all the events of his and my daughter Karen's wedding day again. I haven't forgotten that I was left locked in the bathroom, while everyone else, including you, went off to Shagthorne Abbey without noticing. Or that trying to climb out of the window, I impaled myself on the hook from which hangs the lavatory brush and was shredded down to my undies. I will never forget the look on the bishop's face as the bride's mother staggered into the abbey, ripped and bleeding, nor Karen's rage. As she said, or rather spat at me during the reception, "You'll do anything to draw attention to yourself, won't you, mother?" It was insult added to injury when you accused me of being jealous of her happiness, especially since it was you who vacated the bathroom as I entered. Somebody turned the key in the lock, albeit absent-mindedly. However, the list made me think very hard about all the intentions I'd had of rising to the millennial challenge, and it is in the spirit of that I offer you the chance to make amends. You'd better get a move on, as I'm departing these shores for a trip to India. It was while I was searching for my sarong that I found my resolutions. Yours, in love and friendship, Vera.
42 The Lines, Heather Green. Dear Vera, so glad you've reminded yourself of your New Year resolutions finally, albeit not until the summer months. In my experience, for most people, that's all they are, good intentions made while giddily intoxicated and kissing strangers, which are left to wither on the vine ere January is but a few days old. I have managed to remain faithful to my resolutions thus far this year, and I intend to continue in that vein, so I'm not going to be tempted by you into silly arguments about what did or did not happen at Karen's wedding. Suffice it to say that I am clear in my own mind that I played no part whatsoever in the sorry tale of your arriving in the Abbey in the middle of your only daughter's marriage ceremony, with your skirt up around your ears and mouthing irreligious profanities. I'm so glad to hear you've finally come out of your depression, though. Your daughter Karen has been in despair about you, and has often been on the telephone to me night and day since the wedding. I don't mind telling you that you had a close brush with homelessness around Easter, until I managed to calm her down and remind her that, though irritating beyond belief sometimes, you are nevertheless a very genuine person, and her mother. I'm very pleased that you've obviously decided to take up your son-in-law St. John's offer of a nice long holiday. I really do think that he and Karen need some quality time together alone, and that they both need to bond with your grandchildren, Sabrina and Nelson, in a way which is impossible with you around, given that you are so competitive for their affections. I'm surprised you settled on India, however, given what you're like about toilet facilities. Don't let it get you constipated like it did during our trip together in the Dormobile, especially not if you're going for several months, as you've apparently promised Karen. I'm enclosing this jumbo box of senna as a going-away gift, and suggest you pack it near the top so you can start taking it straight away before your phobias have a chance to take hold. Have fun, old friend, and try to come back the richer for absorbing some of that wonderful Eastern philosophy. Perhaps you might even learn some meditation out there, which I believe can be so helpful for people of an angry, impulsive nature. I shall look forward to hearing all about your adventures in your cheery missives. With warmth and compassion, Irene.
Dear Irene, I shall ignore your ridiculous aspersions about kissing strangers, owing to shortness of time, but I must remind you, since obviously your brain is now a colander, that the bathroom incident was the culmination of words about the catering. Not only did you criticise my use of sheep's yoghurt in the blue cheese quiche, but you objected to the wilted dandelion in the salad and my own unique recipe for exotic lamb sausage. You said, if I remember correctly, fortunately my brain is not a colander. Where was I? Oh, yes. You said that the sausage skin reminded you of an unpleasant object you hadn't seen for many a year. My poor son Howard was so hurt. You've no idea how many sheep he had to wrestle to get that length of intestine. He and his partner Anthony were exhausted, despite the help of St. John and his gaffer tape. Such a pity, as I was going to suggest we do a cookery book together, called, I thought, Two Fat Sausages. Thank you for the senna pods, but they are the last thing I shall need in India. I'm assured curry works on a level similar to colonic irrigation. I am not, by the way, going for several months, whatever Karen has told you, but on a 3-week guided tour with an exciting new enterprise called Gaga. They specialise in adventures for the elderly, and had we been speaking, I would have asked you to come too. Though on second thoughts, you'd probably be happier with a quiet saunter in Bognor. St. John, who is the most thoughtful and generous of son-in-laws, offered me a holiday months ago, but I haven't had a moment. What with the renovations at the Bothy, Karen has spent a fortune on so-called architects, and what's left of the house is held up by scaffolding. Helping out Howard and Anthony at the sheep farm and looking after Sabrina and little Nelson. I do wonder what Karen is thinking of, getting herself pregnant again so quickly. She's already blown up like a barrage balloon, which can't be wise in the first year of a marriage. Sabrina, poor little thing, has sobbed herself to sleep every night for a week at the thought of being separated from her granny. I told her I'd be back in time to see her new little brother or sister born, but that just made her cry louder. All till I'm in touch with foreign parts, Vera.
Dear Vera, I know you're just about to leave these shores, but I really must clear up some of your misapprehensives before you go. 1. Blue cheese quiche is made with blue cheese. If it were otherwise, it would be named otherwise. Personally, I would anticipate very little demand for an item named sheep's yoghurt quiche, let's say. 2. The dandelion leaves in question were not wilted, they were deceased. 3. You said the sausage skin reminded you of an unpleasant such and such. I merely added that I wouldn't know, as I had not personally seen one. Ever. Clive and I preferred to keep some mystery in our marriage. 4. If you are considering writing a book called Two Fat Sausages, I suggest you find another more suitably sized writing partner. I personally have never been anything but a size 12. With sincere best wishes for a very pleasant holiday, Irene.
Darjeeling, Tuesday. Dear St. John and Karen, sorry to be brief in this wire, but tour bus impounded by police after nasty incident. Pig on the road. Animal, I mean, not driver. Rescued by charming Indian taxi driver who drove me the rest of the way. 675 miles. Now completely out of rupees. Staying with taxi driver. Wire money to State Bank of India, Darjeeling. Love, V. Mother. Darjeeling, Wednesday. Dear Sabrina, hope you like the postcard of the mosque. Granny's only seen it from the outside, too. Women aren't allowed in. Missing you terribly, but have been adopted by several cats, dogs and goats. Oh, and a pig. We're all staying with a helpful taxi driver and his large family. The weather is freezing. Just as well as with all of us in one room, it's very cosy. I've bought you a sari and lots of jewels. Bet you can't wait to have me back. All my love, Granny. Darjeeling, Thursday. Dear Irene, Thought you'd enjoy this ethereal vista of the Himalayas, so different from the flatness of Heather Green. I went up to 8,000 feet yesterday, hanging onto a cable car. Actually, I was hanging onto it from below, having slipped out as I leant over to take a photo. Marvellous view of the tea estate. No trouble with the other down below. Food wonderful. Sheep's yoghurt in everything, and other parts of its anatomy. Now thinking of travel cookbook. Vera's Voyages. On my own, naturally. Vera. Glengoolie's Tea Room, Darjeeling, Friday. Dear Howard, you would love it here. It's very oldie-worldy English, just like the books I used to read to you when you were little. There are lots of falling-down colonial houses and falling-down colonial people. Gin is very cheap. I've met a lovely couple of boys, Raj and Shiva, who remind me so much of you and Anthony. They are a great giggle. They're tourist guides, and tonight they're taking me to the Planters Club for its speciality. You guessed it, gin fizzes. Love and kisses to you both, Mumsy.
The Coach House Apartment, The Bothy, Long Lane, Little Shagthorne. Dear Vera, surprise! Here I am, tucked up in your bed at Karen and St. John's beautiful home, early on a lovely English summer's morn, with your little granddaughter Sabrina nestled at my side while we write to Granny Small. Sabrina is such a dear, isn't she? And so affectionate. Anyway, in case you're wondering why I'm here, Karen rang me just after you'd left, asking if I could spare time to help look after Sabrina while you are away, as she is so heavily pregnant. Karen, that is not your granddaughter. Naturally, I was only too delighted to help out, and will remain here as long as I'm needed. So don't even think of being obliged to me. It is entirely my pleasure that your family feels so comfortable with me that they can ask for my help. I went over to dinner to your son Howard's and his partner Anthony's last night. Gosh, it was fun, and the food was superb. Not a drop of sheep's yoghurt anywhere, and so beautifully presented. They really are lovely, and they seem so happy together. They're almost like a married couple, aren't they? I hope you managed to get this, care of the State Bank of India, Darjeeling. Don't you have a post-restaurant address over there? It would be so nice to be able to keep you informed of your family news on a more regular basis. Or we could even email each other. St. John has been showing me around the World Wide Web on his computer, and it really is a marvel. He's given me my own email address while I'm here, Irene@littleshag.com. St. John says that there are internet cafes all over the world now, so if you can find one in Darjeeling, have a go, Joe. All for now, as it really is time we got up. Warmest wishes, Irene.
Chum's Hotel, The Ridge, Darjeeling. Email verasvoyages@tandoori.com. Dear St. John, thank you so much for the money transfer, which arrived in the nick of time. I was about to take to the street with my begging bowl like so many of the other residents of Darjeeling. They are a picturesque lot in their rags, though I wouldn't go so far as to have anything amputated. I can also pay my bill at the Planters Club, where I apparently ordered 32 gin fizzes. You really are a dear, and the best son-in-law any mother could wish for. How is Karen, by the way? I hope the pregnancy is progressing well, and she has got over that deafening heaving and retching and returned to her normal colour. Incidentally, I've had a very odd letter from Irene. I know she is staying with you, but she also seems to have borrowed my identity. If I don't return soon, she'll have taken to wearing my clothes and calling herself Vera. I hope you're impressed with my email skills. My dear new friends, the boys Raj and Shiva, introduced me to the Jasmine Cybernet Cafe. They said it was high time I joined the World Wide Web, and besides, I'd be able to keep in touch with them. All my love to you and the children. And Karen, of course. Vera. Vera's Voyages at Tandoori.com. Dear Irene. Recipe number 1. Sagaloo with pineapple. 2 pounds aloo, 1 pound sag, 1 pineapple, 2 cardamom, 1 teaspoon garam masala, 1 teaspoon coriander, 1/2 kilogram sheep's yoghurt. Stew aloo in ghee until soft, add sag, cubed pineapple and spices and stir vigorously. After 2 or 3 mins, add yoghurt and serve with fresh chapati. Please pass on to Howard and Anthony. Your first cyber pal, Vera.
Irene at littleshag.com. Dear Vera, well, here I am on my inaudible trip on the World Wide Web, and I have to say it seems very like common or garden typing to me. Did I ever mention that's what I did before I was married? Actually, I wasn't a typist in a pool. I was personal secretary to Mr. Blundell, the managing director of Fairweather Feet, a very well-respected firm that made quality Wellington boots and galoshes. St. John has just suggested that I do some office work for him now he's discovered my latent talent. Such a shame that you didn't learn an office skill when you were young. Otherwise you could help him out and pay off some of the debt you apparently now owe him. What was it you used to do? Wasn't it factory work of some kind, or were you a shop girl? I half remember some rambling tale you once told me when you were in your cups about your mother telling you you'd be one of Woolworths if you didn't apply yourself harder at school. Speaking of school, I went with Sabrina to her Bring a Granny event at Shagthorne Junior yesterday, since you weren't here. It's a new innovation to bring history alive for the little dears, hearing it at first hand. Sabrina was so happy I could go with her, and was so proud of my storytelling skills. I told them all about rationing and Woolton pie, and afterwards the catering staff begged me for the recipe. Happily also, Mrs. Patel was there from the Filcham Magna Corner store, so I asked her if she knew what sag and aloo were. Honestly, if you mean potatoes and spinach, I don't know why you don't just come out and say it. Sabrina said it sounded horrible. She's such a caution. Nevertheless, as soon as it was home time, we trundled over to her Uncle Howard's to give him the recipe, since you made such a song and dance about it, and he cooked it straight away, substituting Cox's orange pippins for the pineapple, since naturally here in the Derby Dales we do not have access to exotica except in tins, and you know what Howard is like about fresh produce. All of us thought it was highly overrated. Sabrina actually said it was pukey, and demonstrated her feelings in the back of the MG Midget when Howard was kind enough to drive us home. She's going to sleep with Granny Irene tonight to make her feel better. Nearly forgot. You had a visitor the other evening. Edward Blunt says you met at the parish OAP Beetle Drive last winter and was inviting you to another this weekend. I told him you were away, so he insisted on taking me instead. You are a dark horse. He's quite attractive in a rough and ready rural sort of way, isn't he? We'll tell you all about it in my next. Fond regards, Irene.
The Coach House, Long Lane, Little Shagthorne. My dear Irene, I'm so sorry to have missed you. I was expecting a warm reunion. Indeed, the hot water bottle in my bed was still warm. But Karen told me you had taken off like a bat out of hell on hearing some news from home. I do hope it's nothing serious. I couldn't help wondering what on earth you were doing at Little Shagthorne when your own daughter Leslie is pregnant and your own grandchild Cheryl Marie must be feeling very neglected. Of course, St. John filled me in about your rift with Leslie after she'd refused to have you over to Oz, and how you suddenly descended here out of the blue. They said you were distraught and how sorry they felt for you. Unfortunately, those sympathies don't last if one outstays one's welcome. It looks as though I've arrived home in the nick of time. Karen's about to burst at the seams, which reminds me of India, and Sabrina's complaining you smelled funny. Ditto. Out of the mouths of babes. I'm sure she's only referring to your tea rose cologne, which I've always thought a little vinegary. She's such a little performer. She's parading around with a turban on her head and has set up a stall on the Bothy building site marketing the jewellery I brought her. She's already sold a hod full of plastic bangles to one of the bricklayers. She's saving up for a mountain bike. Everything else is forgotten. Must stop now. I've got an avalanche of mail to answer. Drat it, Edward Blunt's coming up the drive. I hope he isn't expecting a warm reunion. Namaste. Ask Mrs. Patel for a translation. Vera.
42 The Limes, Heather Green. My dear Karen and St. John, I'm sending this note hand-delivered by Mr. Blunt, as he has kindly offered to pick up my other suitcase from you and drive it back over to me at the Limes. Sorry to leave in such haste as to make myself so forgetful, but as you know, my neighbour Beryl made it all sound so dramatic that I simply had to leave immediately and come and see for myself. I have to tell you, thus far I've drawn a complete blank, so I'm none the wiser. Certainly no strange man seems to be watching the house now, and I've been peeping out from behind the curtains ever since I arrived back yesterday afternoon. And there's no sign of a forced entry, and nothing seems to be missing, except, of course, the mysterious disappearance of the contents of my dustbin, as reported by Beryl to me when she phoned me at your lovely home. Naturally, I've put the Heather Green West neighbourhood watch on full alert, but I can only imagine that it was just children having a lark. Which doesn't explain the mystery man staking out the house, of course, but then Beryl is prone to fervid over-imagining sometimes. She used to be a leading light in the Heather Green Amateur Dramatic Society, or HAMS, as it is known to aficionados, and I think she misses the drama. Hope Vera arrived back safely. Give her my love, and tell her we'll catch up on all our news soon. Fondest love, Reen, XXXXX.
The coach house, the Bothy, Little Shagthorn, dear Irene. A quick note which I'll pop in with the suitcase and bag Edward is bringing. I found sundry articles of yours dotted all over. How long have you been using the truss? So have collected them all into this gorgeous handcrafted Rajasthani bag. Do feel free to keep it. I've got lots more. I'm so glad Edward's removing his suitcase, which I fell over several times. Whatever possessed you to bring such a big one? You must have thought you were moving in. Now, at last, I can unpack all my treasures. I'm going to completely redo the coach house Indian style, and have brought back lots of hangings in shades of saffron, tangerine and magenta, the colours worn by the Buddhist monks I encountered. Photo enclosed. That's the chief lama holding the football. I passed your note on to Karen and St. John once I realised it was for them. Edward had given it straight to me. He's well-meaning enough, but a simple soul. I do hope he isn't delivering your stuff in his poultry van. Last time he gave me a lift in that, I came out smelling like an Indian loo and covered in chicken feathers, so of course I couldn't help reading it. It sounds as though Beryl isn't the only one who misses drama. Why on earth would a mystery man be lurking about your house and riffling the contents of your dustbin? That sort of thing only happens to film stars and television presenters. You haven't won the lottery and not told us. Anyway, I do hope, whatever the problem with Leslie, you've made it up now. I'll write properly and send you more pictures of my adventures as soon as I'm settled. What a good thing St. John installed the computer. Must log on and email all my new pals on the subcontinent. All the best, V.
The Bothy, dearest Irene. Thanks for your letter, which Mother eventually gave me. I'm glad you're okay, and of course you're welcome here any time, though where we'd put you I don't know, what with the Bothy still being a building site, and needing a nursery for the new baby and a suite for the nanny I'm insisting St. John hires. Mother's got boxes and trunks everywhere. She's turning the coach house into a Bedouin tent. There's carpets and cushions and yak skin rugs. St. John says we'll have to rename it the Shag Palace. Even Howard said the colours made him feel bilious, though that could have been the curry she insisted on feeding him. She's trying out all her new recipes. If she sends you the one for mutton masala, don't touch it. Love, Karen.
42 The Limes, Heather Green. Dear Vera, I've just received your nasty letter in the post. I don't know what you think you stand to gain from fabricating lies about a rift between myself and my daughter Leslie. We are, in fact, the best of friends, and as close as a mother and daughter can be when one lives in England and the other lives in Australia. In fact, we are both currently looking into our finances to see if we can afford for me to fly out again to Melbourne to be with her during her confinement. As for outstaying my welcome with your daughter Karen and her husband St. John, all I can say is, ha! You should have heard what they were saying about your eminent return before you go throwing stones in glass houses. Your ears would have spontaneously combusted. Edward has also delivered your note to me this morning, which I read out to him, so now he knows what you say about him and his poultry van behind his back. He says you can forget free cocks from him from now on, and can go out and buy them yourself. The truss, incidentally, was his. It's a long story, and not one I would want to go into with such an antipathetic correspondent such as yourself, but suffice it to say that we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves at the Beetle Drive, and got on like a house on fire, as in fact I seem to do with all your friends and family. Must go, there's a policeman at my door. You may think my dustbin being plundered is a joke, but I am happy to say that here in Heather Green it is sufficiently out of the ordinary to arouse the interest of the CID. Kind regards, Irene. P.S. Almost forgot. Welcome home.
Bothy, little shagthorn. Dear Irene, forgive this scribble, but Mother's got all the computer equipment in her room and I'm far too huge and heavy to drag myself there. This painting by Sabrina is all I've got to hand. Ignore the dark red blotches. I don't know what you've been telling Ma. She's accusing us of saying nasty things behind her back and trying to get rid of her. It seems to stem from a misunderstanding about why you were here. I'm afraid it's my fault. I let it drop that you'd planned a long visit to Oz, but your daughter Leslie had refused to pay for your flight, and you were so upset we asked you over. Also, our neighbour, Edward Blunt, the poultry farmer, hasn't spoken to us since he came for your stuff. You should know they were seeing each other for a while, but fell out over her attempts to re-educate him. She kept buying him classic FM tapes to listen to on his delivery rounds. He said he felt a fool playing William Tell to a van full of squawking chickens. When she gave his favourite tweed jacket to little Shagthorn Help the Aged, saying it made him look like Wurzel Gummidge, it was the final straw. No pun intended. In a village, it's a bit bloody awkward, so we sent her away on holiday. She's now taken to her bed with what she says is a touch of malaria. My husband St. John's taken a temperature and says it's only a cold, but she's swathed in a mosquito net and demanding quinine. I just can't deal with this in my present condition. The only good thing is that Ma's temporarily stopped cooking. Her last effort in the kitchen, curried brains, her own, judging by her recent behaviour, nearly brought on premature labour. Do, for goodness sake, do whatever you can to smooth things over. All the best. Karen. P.S. Forgot to ask what the police make of the dustbin situation. Have they considered foxes?
42 The Limes, Heather Green. My very dear Karen, thank you for your note and for darling little Sabrina's painting. The red blotches do make it look rather disturbed. Has she painted it since her Granny Vera's been back? Poor little mite, we got on so well. She used to cling to me like a limpet when I was staying with you and we had our cuddles. So I suppose she must be really missing me. Doubly so if her real grandmother has turned nasty. Anyway, it's nothing new to me. How our relationship has survived thus far I sometimes fail to comprehend. But I am not one to bear grudges, as you know, so I'm inking a letter for She Who Must Be Obeyed to try to smooth things over, as you suggest. Try to rest, dear. In your condition you can't be too careful. Tons of love and kisses for you, Reen. P.S. I was a bit puzzled about you telling Vera that you invited me over because you felt sorry for me, since you and I both know that you begged me to come. But I suppose you decided on a white lie to make her feel better. Anyway, hope the ink does the trick to turn her mood around. 42 The Limes, Dear Vera. Karen tells me you're poorly with a slight cold. I hope you aren't being a nuisance to her while she is so heavily pregnant. She must be exhausted, poor lamb. To relieve your symptoms, I recommend boiling up some cloves with lemon juice and honey, and if you want to push the boat out, mix in some whiskey. It works for me. My news is that the Heather Green police have drawn an absolute blank so far on the mystery man who stole the rubbish from my dustbin. I'm inclined now to believe it must have been a starving homeless person, or, as your daughter Karen suggested, maybe a fox. However, Beryl next door still swears there was a man staking out my house while I was away. In fact, she still has nightmares about him. Looking at the sketch she did of him in order to assist police with their inquiries, I'm not surprised, but then again perhaps that is due to her drawing skills, or lack of them. Speaking of which, your gorgeous little granddaughter Sabrina has just sent her Granny Spencer a lovely drawing of dark red splodges and something that looks like a meat cleaver sticking out of somebody's head. I hope you're feeling better by the time this arrives, and are being less of a drain on poor Karen's scant resources, energy-wise. Much love, Irene.
The Coach House, the Bothy. Dear Irene, haven't got time to write to you about adventures, as I am busy preparing a lecture on them for Great and Little Shagthorne Geographical Society. They've begged me to fill their Traveller's Tales slot with a commentary and slides. It's a great honour, which I shall have to work night and day to fulfil, especially as I've also offered to do the refreshments. I thought it would be a good opportunity to try out some of the recipes I'm including in my cookbook, Vera's Voyages. I've had to scour the World Wide Web for ingredients. You can't get anything exotic in the Derby Dales, as my son Howard is always saying. I haven't got a cold, it's a recurrence of malaria. It can dog travellers for years, as you'd have no occasion to know. Whiskey is the last thing you should take with quinine, though, come to think of it, gin wouldn't be so bad. But I always find the best cure, feverish though I am, is to be up and active. Sabrina, little angel, has been helping me by designing my Traveller's Tales programme. I told her all about the goddess Kali and her bloodthirsty ways, which may be the origin of the meat cleaver. I couldn't help noticing that her severed heads have an uncanny resemblance to yours, but it's probably a coincidence. Must get on. I'm doing a trial run of Gobi Manchurian tonight, which Howard and Anthony are coming to sample. I've inked an invite to the do on Tuesday, though it's too short notice for you to be able to come. I'm sure Karen would send love if she wasn't asleep, and Sabrina if she remembered. Yours, Vera. Great and Little Shagthorne Geographical Society cordially request your presence at Vera Small's vibrant and entrancing account of her voyage through India, followed by a reception to launch her collection of Oriental recipes. An evening wonderfully evocative of the sights, the sounds, the tastes, the smells of India.
42 The Limes, Heather Green. Dear Vera, I'm so glad I managed to get to your Geographical Society do, despite the short notice you gave me. It was just luck that Edward Blunt was staying over here at the Limes when the invitation arrived, so we just leapt into the van, drove like maniacs up the motorway, and Bob's your uncle, as the saying goes. I wonder why. Anyway, as we had to drive straight back afterwards, I didn't manage to congratulate you on your efforts, which, as far as I could hear you from where I was sitting in the second row, were sterling despite the hecklers. I don't care what they shouted. I thought you looked really interesting in that sari. Would you call that colour puce? As for your cooking demonstration, well, what can I say? It certainly lived up to your promise of the smells of India. I don't know if you noticed, but I struck up quite a conversation with Alan Bagshaw, the Jogsock president, during your interval, and he's begged me to give a lecture on my Australian travels. He wanted me to do it the week after next, but what with expecting my daughter Leslie to send me a panic message at any moment to go to Melbourne and assist with her birth, I thought it more prudent to put it off a while longer. I hope that Howard and Anthony are over their biliousness now. Any idea what caused it? Do give them my love. And love, as always, to your daughter Karen, who looked blooming, to dear St. John and baby Nelson, and, of course, to Granny Irene's little Sabrina. Best wishes to you too, dear. Irene.
The coach house, dear Irene. I suppose I should thank you for making the effort to attend my occasion, but really, what with your late arrival, insistence on clambering over my audience just when I'd got them totally enthralled, and Edward Blunt's cell phone going off, and him having a loud argument about foul pest during my poignant description of the cremation ghats at Varanasi, it would have been better if you hadn't. The hecklers, by the way, were telling Edward to shut up, except for the one who was kindly pointing out that I'd inadvertently hitched up the back of my sari. It must have been when I dashed to the loo with pre-show nerves. Fortunately, my undies were in the same shade of flamingo. The moment was only saved by the elemental magic of fire. As a fan commented afterwards, they could almost smell the bodies burning. Actually, that turned out to be the dratted projector, which Alan Bagshaw insisted he'd had mended. He's very forgetful, I'm afraid. There's a move in the society to get him declared unfit for office. Several of the audience asked afterwards who on earth was the woman with the hysterical laugh. I explained, with my face the same colour as my sari, that you were, or had been, a friend. I got some old-fashioned looks, I can tell you. At least one person suggested your behaviour was deliberate sabotage. It kept me awake all night wondering if that was true. Why, Irene? Why? Jealousy, I suppose. I've got a lovely life in a lovely home with a loving son-in-law and grandchildren. You've got Edward Blunt. I do hope you'll ponder on this and decide not to let the green-eyed monster triumph. We used to be such pals. Yours in sorrow, Vera. P.S. There were a couple of publishers at the Do, acquaintances of Howard and Anthony's. They're starting up their own list on the internet. Cookery books are apparently big sellers. They were so astonished by the taste of my bindi bhaji, I said I'd send them a proposal for a book of my own.
42 The Limes, Heather Green. My dear Vera, flabbergasted would not be too strong a word to describe my feelings on reading your last, and that only since I put a drop of rum in my coffee to calm me down. Pre this old-fashioned remedy, I was running the gamut of emotions from deepest hurt to violent outrage. What more do you want of my friendship? I feel I've given all I have to give. You go frolicking off to India, I go to your home to look after your family. You feel poorly, I send an old family recipe for the cure. You send me a tardy invitation to a lecture giving. I move heaven and earth to be there to wish you well. If you weren't far too long in the tooth, I'd think you were going through the change of life. Me, jealous of you. It would be laughable if it weren't so wounding. I wonder if the boot isn't on the other foot, and that you are in fact jealous of me, or rather, of my friendship with Edward, who I hear you made several embarrassing attempts to seduce. Think long and hard about this before replying, and when you do, post it care of St. Urban, Melbourne, for, and here's something else you might be jealous of, my daughter Leslie has sent me an air ticket and entreated me to fly halfway round the world to be with her for the birth of my second grandchild. Yours in tiny little pieces, Irene. P.S. Not that you'd be interested, but a strange man who looks just like Beryl next door's sketch of the man who was staking out my house when I was away followed me round the supermarket yesterday. I managed to lose him in feminine hygiene, but it has left me feeling very vulnerable and glad to be going away again. But don't, whatever you do, feel worried on my account. 42 The Limes, Heather Green, Dearest Leslie. I've been looking at my finances and find that if I'm very careful with the rest of the year, I can in fact afford to come over to Australia to help you with the birth and to look after my darling little Cheryl Marie. I've bought my ticket today and will be arriving on Sunday. With all my love, dear, Mummy, XX. P.S. Love to Brian. Any news yet about his divorce so the two of you can get married? It would be so unfortunate if the new little one were to be born out of wedlock.
Coach house apartment, the bothy, dear Irene. Oh, for the days of telegrams, or if only you had email. Can't bear you to fly halfway round the world in violent outrage. It would only give you flatulence, and nothing is worse on a cramped plane, as I know from personal experience. I do hope this note reaches you in time. I've enclosed a photo of us, which is one of my favourites, arms linked, squinting into the sun. If I remember rightly, it was taken in Capri by a gentleman who invited me to the casino. You insisted afterwards he was a gigolo who preyed on lonely older women. That's probably true of the man whom you claim has been following you. What on earth were you doing in feminine hygiene? Anyway, dear, the photo is to remind you of happier times, and whatever our ups and downs, how fond I am of you. Good luck on your travels, Vera.
Seat 56B, Jumbo Jet, up somewhere very high indeed. Dear Vera. Your letter arrived just as I was leaving the Limes, so I'm replying en route to Australia, and what will undoubtedly be the grateful and heartfelt embrace of my daughter Leslie. She's so selfless. Even at nearly 8.5 months enceinte, she tried every reason she could think of to put me off coming to help her, although she did, of course, buy me my plane ticket. Thank you for the photograph, and what I take to be your apology in not quite so many words. Up here, speeding through the cerebral blue sky, sipping my second complimentary Bloody Mary and chewing my nuts, I already feel calmer and less frazzled than I have felt in donkey's ages, even though I hate heights. I remember the gigolo incident very well, better, evidently, than you. It was indeed on Capri. You claimed you had forgotten to take your spectacles out with you, although I knew, of course, it was only vanity, so did not see the hourly rates written on the back of what you cared to think of as the gentleman in question's calling card. You were giggling and fluttering at him, and were about to be dragged off to an hotel room, arm in arm with the odious creature, when I took the card myself and warned you of the expense you were about to incur, 100,000 lira for half an hour. Even then, as I remember, you asked him if he took travellers' cheques. The man who followed me was of an entirely different cast. His hair was an brilliantine, for starters. He was about 40 or so, with natural wavy hair, rather like the colour mine used to be before I went grey, a kind of spun gold with amber threads. He was tall, handsome, and quite distinguished-looking. However, not being as easy prey as you, and lest we forget this was the man who allegedly ransacked my rubbish bin for purposes unknown, I went into the feminine hygiene aisle of the supermarket to shake him off, which I did. Haven't you ever noticed it's a no-go area for men? Clive was just the same when he was alive. As far as he cared to be aware, I never had a single period in 35 years of marriage. Don't know why I'm going into this, must be the Bloody Marys. We'll post this from Melbourne when I get there. I think Leslie now has a home computer, so we'll send you an email address soon for speedier correspondence. Fond regards, Irene.
Karen's Cave, West Wing, the Bothy. Dear Irene, Ma tells me you suddenly took off for Oz, so I'll send this to Leslie's. I'm so glad you've made it up with her. Leslie's a great girl and well worth the price of the airfare. I've enclosed a good luck card and a note for her, as it's ages since we were in touch. Be sure and let us have your email address ASAP. Can't speak for Ma, but love from the rest of us. Karen. Karen's Cave. Dear Leslie, how are you, me old matey? Ready to pop? Bet you can't wait to get rid of it. To think in a couple of months I'll have 3 kids. More fool me for believing St. John when he said I couldn't get pregnant while I was breastfeeding. You'd think a vet would know. He's obviously more familiar with a cow's insides than a woman's. I'm definitely having my tubes tied after this one. Ma's on his side, naturally. She thinks the sun shines out of his arse. Talking of which, she won't get any more grandchildren from my brother Howard and his partner Anthony. Though having said that, I believe they're thinking of surrogacy. Hope they're not expecting me to offer. Ma, like the poor, is always with us. She's gone quite batty and is currently insisting she's being stalked round Little Shagthorn by a handsome younger man. If only. Most of the blokes round here look like serial killers. I really miss our good times together. We were a pair of naughty Sheilas, weren't we? None of that in the dull old Dales. I have got a couple of cannabis plants in the greenhouse. Ma keeps asking when they're going to grow tomatoes. Good luck with the birth. I'm wincing and crossing my legs at the thought of it. Wish I was there to crack a slab of tinnies with ya. Loads of love, Karen. P.S. How's Brian shaping up? Have you managed to stop him wearing the tight T-shirts? P.P.S. My email address for more personal correspondence is karen@greatshag.com.
The coach house, the bothy, dear Irene. I hope you're settled in and over your jet lag, which must have been considerable if you drank Bloody Marys all the way. I can imagine what a killer feeling lonely and unwanted can be, but you're not falling back into your old habits, are you? I expect your family are pleased to have you. Well, your granddaughter Cheryl Marie, anyway. They're always insecure with a new brother or sister on the way. Sabrina still hasn't got over Nelson's arrival, and now she's got another one coming. I can't help but feel Karen is very selfish. She's gone quite batty. Must be the hormones. Keeps insisting she needs more space. Goodness knows why in a house with 12 bedrooms. She's taken to spending most of the time in the West Wing's turret, now christened Karen's Cave. There's a retractable ladder and bolts on the door. I don't know what she's doing up there, but I hope she's growing her hair. At this rate, St. John will only be able to exercise his rights if he climbs up it. I was rather alarmed at your description of the man you say was following you. It exactly fits one I keep encountering here. He was staring at me in the butcher's the other day. I'd gone in for a pound of shank, but I bought 4 pig's trotters. It was so unnerving. I mentioned it to Karen when she clambered down for lunch, but her only response was to complain about a toenail in the curry. Were there any letters with my address torn up in your dustbin? The odd thing is he looks vaguely familiar, especially the hair, but I just can't place him. Time to put Rex on his lead and Nelson in his pram and collect Sabrina from school. St. John's put the Land Rover at my disposal, but it keeps me fit trotting up and down the hills. I expect you'll soon be run off your feet. Warm regards to all, Vera.
St. Urban, Melbourne, Australia. Email irene@osmail.com. Dear Vera. Arrived here in one piece, but without luggage, which apparently has been lost somewhere in Kuala Lumpur, wherever that may be. What is it about Australia, me and clothes? Last time I was here, as you may remember, Leslie sent all my luggage back to England, and I was forced to improvise with your old cast-offs. This time, I'm wearing Leslie's pre-maternity wardrobe, which she rather crossly won me. She wants back next week. On Wednesday, to be precise. Apparently she has booked herself in for a caesarean section next Tuesday at 11 a.m, as she doesn't want the inconvenience of not knowing when she might go into labour. Can you imagine? Talk about the want-it-now, got-to-have-it spoilt baby generation. I wouldn't mind, but she kept me waiting weeks before she would deign to pop out of me. By Dr. Crank's calculations, I was 11.5 months pregnant before he clamped a little head between his forceps. Little Cheryl Marie, of course, is delighted to have her old Granny Spencer back again. My, how she's grown. We've just been having a rather difficult conversation about how babies get into mummies' tummies. I bit the bullet and told her the truth about Daddy's putting their wee-wees into Mummy's front bottoms, but I'm afraid she thought it rather implausible. Can't say I blame her. Leslie's screaming in the kitchen for some reason at the moment, so it's hard to concentrate. We'll send this now. Isn't email magic? Love, Irene. P.S. Don't know why you think my mystery man would be following you, and he certainly couldn't have got your address from my dustbin. As you know, I value order, organisation and neatness above everything, so I file your letters in a folder called Correspondence, where I interleave them with the rough copies of my missives to you. However much they might irritate me at times, I would never tear them up and bin them. P.P.S. I will not dignify your comments about drinking and old habits with a reply. Suffice it to say that some people might say that 3 Bloody Marys, a bottle of wine and a couple of brandies consumed within a stressful 24-hour period which was spent willing my plane to stay in the sky was on the light side and only common sense.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, sorry to have been tardy in my response, but we have had high dramas in Little Shagthorne. I knew Karen was playing fast and loose with fate as well as St. John, with her blasted ladder, and sure enough, last Friday, blimp-sized as she is, she slipped and tumbled down it. In seconds she was groaning and thrashing around with contractions, 2 months early. As this gimme, gimme, gimme generation find out, God works in mysterious ways, particularly with labour. She's now in Great Shagthorne Infirmary maternity ward, with her feet higher than her head, a position with which I'm afraid she is all too familiar. She'll have to hold it for longer than usual, though. The hospital won't allow a premature birth. They haven't got the incubators. I must say, it's been lovely for us all to have the peace. The children have been much happier, and even St. John is far from inconsolable. He, poor boy, has to do the round trip to the hospital after his veterinarian surgery every day to fulfil Karen's demands for delicatessen food and foot rubs. Fortunately, there's always one of my delicious dishes on the table when he gets home. He often eats it and passes out, absolutely exhausted. Sheep Dippers has had its events too. I don't know whether I mentioned it, but Howard and Anthony have been trying for a surrogate baby. I suppose they got the idea from the sheep flock's artificial insemination. An agency has put them in touch with a young woman who's willing to help. Quite who supplies the wiggly bits and how they get into it I haven't liked to ask. Something to do with saucers. If you think wee-wees and front bottoms are tricky, try explaining that one to a 7-year-old. The whole story is going to be documented by Dale's TV, our local cable channel. Howard and Anthony are delighted. They see A Life with Sheep, as Dale's TV are calling it, as good publicity for the yoghurt. The TV company hasn't got a lot of money for the production, apparently. Their internet launch was a disaster, so another bonus is that they've accepted my offer to do the location catering. It'll be an excellent opportunity to expand my repertoire. Did I tell you I've got publishers begging for a proposal? Well, dear, I must get on. A grandma's work is never done, as I'm sure you have rediscovered. Good luck to Leslie. Her baby must be due any moment. And to you, Vera.
Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera, found out why Leslie was screaming. She was giving birth to a baby girl on kitchen floor. Can't stop. More tomorrow. Irene. Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera, well, talk about the best laid plans of mice and pregnant women. After all the trouble she went to, booking the best doctors and an anaesthetist and a private room, and thinking she can just play God and decide to have her baby delivered on an operating table at a time that's convenient to her busy little diary, my daughter Leslie gave birth to her new baby girl on the kitchen floor, braced between the washing machine and the tumble dryer, while I was emailing you. By the time I got to it, it was practically all over. I just had to clean up and cut the cord with the kitchen scissors. The paramedics said I'd done a very professional job, but then I've seen it performed so many times on peak practice. The baby is beautiful and has the most luxurious strawberry blonde curly hair, so although they're going to christen her Sarah Jane, we call her Bubbles. Unfortunately, I was so busy with Leslie's nether regions, I didn't have time to notice my other little granddaughter, Cheryl Marie, watching intently from the doorway. After witnessing the mysteries of birth at close quarters, she is now inclined to believe my story about how babies are made, and has started glaring angrily at Brian, Leslie's partner, every time he comes in the house. Mind you, I'm afraid I do likewise. His divorce isn't through yet, so my poor little Bubbles is illegitimate. What times we live in. I've had time now to read your last email properly, and I'm so sorry to hear about your poor daughter Karen's troubles. Is she still managing to keep the baby inside her? But then again, why wouldn't the little mite be in a hurry to get out when its parents are in such a rush to get it in, so to speak? Everything is now with this generation. They've no concept of planning and waiting and patience. Got to go. Leslie's shouting for a cup of tea, and I'd better check Bubbles' nappy. With much love from one exhausted granny to another, Irene. P.S. If you do go ahead with selling your recipes, ask your publishers if they would like a proposal for an Australian cookery book. I found a wonderful way with fricasseed emu.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, congratulations! Another little girl. I do so hope my daughter Karen doesn't have another boy. Nelson's not walking yet, though goodness knows his legs are long enough, and he's already such a handful. When I asked Sabrina what she'd like her mummy to have next, she said a supply of condoms. Perhaps she understands more about the process than I thought. I'll never know the half of what she learnt when we lived on that trailer park. Anyway, whatever sex Karen's baby is, it's still inside. Unlike my son Howard and his partner Anthony's, they've had a terrible time trying to get their host mother Natasha pregnant. Turns out they've both got low sperm count. Has there been a case of that on peak practice? Howard blames Anthony for riding horses in his youth. Anthony blames Howard for wearing tight trousers. They both blame each other for eating too much fish. Apparently the salmon round here are riddled with female hormones. They've had the most awful rows about it, and all in front of the Dales TV cameras. I never realised how intimate a life with sheep would be. It's years since I've seen Howard's private parts, and now he's about to share them with the nation. Thank goodness they've enlisted the help of St. John and his veterinarian syringe. I just pray Dale's TV put a bag over Natasha's head before they film what he does with it. The good news is my location catering has been a great success. The director says he's never known a film crew get back to work so fast. Lots of love to you all, and a big kiss for Bubbles. With a name like that, she'll certainly be carrying on the family traditions. Have one for me, Vera.
Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera, it is amazing the speed of this email business, isn't it? One of the products of this now generation that I approve of. And talk about the saving on postage. I'm thinking that I might buy a computer myself when I get back to Heather Green, so I can continue to communicate electronically. I couldn't sleep last night, so I started skirping the web, as I've seen your little Sabrina do. And you'd be gobsmacked, to use Leslie's favourite word, to know what you can do on it. You can go anywhere and buy anything. You'd never need to leave your house again if you didn't want to. Must be a boon to agoraphobics. Back to your last missive. I do think you're being overcritical of baby boy Nelson. How on earth could he be expected to be walking at his age? I wonder if you're not being tainted with this now business yourself. As for Howard, I don't wonder you sound shocked about his goings-on. For myself, I can't say in all honesty that I want you to continue to keep me informed about his and Anthony's progress in that department. I think there's been a misunderstanding about my Australian recipes. I didn't mean for you to have them. I just thought that your publisher might be interested in me doing my own book. Thank you, incidentally, for sending a kiss to Bubbles. I shall gloss over your allusion to family traditions about drinking. I've been skimming through some of Leslie's psychology self-help books. Have you ever heard of projection? I'll leave it with you to think about. Must trot off. I've rejoined the Creative Writing for Senior Citizens class now. I'm back in Melbourne, and it's my first session today. With fondest regards, Irene.
The greenhouse, the bothy. Dear Irene. I don't know that I do approve of this addiction to speed. Email is all very well, but it's put me in touch with so many foreign parts, and each one expects an answer not so much now as yesterday. There isn't a shoot today. They're still waiting for the results from the last insemination. I don't know how the mother bore up, but St. John got back knackered. So for once I've got time to myself. I decided to indulge in some much-needed peace and reflection, and as you see, I'm writing this in the greenhouse. It's so pleasant to be surrounded by growing things. I'm sitting next to Karen's tomato plants, which I, of course, have been left to tend. They are a beautiful shade of viridian, and I'm breathing in their earthy scent, which I must say is very lulling. Oops, dropped off there for a while. Oh, now if I'd been at the computer, I'd have crashed onto the keyboard, deleted everything and got an imprint of the alphabet on my forehead. See what I mean? Going at my own pace, slow and steady, I'll achieve much more. You might want to consider that point if your psycho self-help books haven't made it. Oh dear, dozed off again. Really, the atmosphere in here is very heady. I feel as though I've had a glass too many, following in your footsteps. Talking of footsteps, I think I'd better have a little walk. I'll leave Nelson, even he's less hyperactive than usual, snoozing in his pram, as the ground outside's very bumpy. Karen ordered the garden to be landscaped as part of the bothy renovations, but like the rest of her plans, it's on hold. Much later. In bed with slight concussion. Can't read the above owing to double vision, but I think I mentioned the garden's in upheaval. In fact, to call it a demolition site wouldn't be exaggerating. I was a little wobbly on my feet, no doubt due to the unaccustomed catnap, and I hadn't taken 3 steps before I'd tumbled into the pit which is destined to become the kidney-shaped swimming pool. Then, Irene, the strangest thing. Against the sunlight I saw this dark, towering silhouette. Naturally, in my concussed state, I thought I was in an episode of The X-Files and was about to be abducted by extraterrestrials. But he, for it was a he, dragged me up the bank and carried me to the shelter of the coach house. He seemed to know exactly where I lived, sat me on the sofa, made me a cup of tea, and at last I got a proper look at him. Guess who he was? None other than your mystery man. Unfortunately, I passed out at that point, and when I came round, St. John was bending over me with a bucket of water. He had disappeared without trace. When I tried to explain it to St. John, he put a cold flannel on my head and told me to stop babbling. This must be more than coincidence. Who on earth, or out of it, is he? Yours in awe, Vera.
Irene@osmail.com. Dear Vera, call Heather Green Police immediately and ask for DC Hogg. Tell him about the stalker moving to Shagthorne. And tell him from me I have no intention of returning to England until he is in police custody. The stalker, not DC Hogg. And in the meantime, don't go out yourself. If you do have to nip down to the shops or something, keep a very tight hold on your handbag. Young men only follow old women for one thing. I showed your email to Leslie, who thinks I'm overreacting and has been trying to talk me out of getting you to tell the police. She sends her best wishes for your speedy recovery, however, and asks if you or St. John could take Karen's laptop to her in the hospital as she is sending her an email. She is most insistent about it, but then they did get on like a house on fire when they were here together last year. Much love and all good wishes for a brief but thorough convalescence. Irene.
Leslie@osmail.com. Dear Karen, your mum got stoned in your greenhouse just from the atmosphere of what she calls the tomatoes, and then claims to have seen a stalker. Must be good stuff. But my mum's mailed her to call in the cops, so you better get St. John to move the plants or harvest them quick. Brian has turned out to be really boring. He was much more interesting when he had a wife to go home to. Mum's going on about marriage, but I'm thinking of telling him to bog off. Better go. She keeps sneaking in and trying to read this over my shoulder. Isn't it hell having the old bag staying with us? Love, Leslie.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, took your advice and rang DC Hogg, but all I got was his voicemail. He hasn't returned my call yet. Obviously Heather Green is a hotbed of crime, and he's out stopping it. You don't have his email address, do you? I've stayed indoors since the incident. I even considered moving up into Karen's turret, but decided I was in danger of becoming agoraphobic. Besides, Mystery Man seemed far from menacing. He had a lovely smile, almost angelic. I wish I could place whom he reminds me of. Oh, someone's banging wildly on my front door. Whoever can that be at 1:45 in the morning? I'll just get St. John's animal tranquilizer darts. 2 a.m, false alarm. It was Howard in tears after another tiff with Anthony. Dale's TV has suspended filming. They say it's lost the feel-good factor. Must finish and bring Howard round. I shot off the tranquilizer dart before I realised. More soon, Vera.
Karen@greatshag.com. Dearest Leslie, no worries. Sent St. John to sort the old bill at our local Masonic. Deal is, they get 3 plants and we get 2. I've got them here in my hospital room, hidden behind the pots of bloody chrysanths your ma sent me. Not that I can reach them with my legs in bloody stirrups. Put me off bondage forever. Like you, fed up with bloody men, bloody babies and bloody mothers. Bloody love, Karen.
Irene@osmail.com. Dear Vera, I don't know DC Hogg's email address. When I was dealing with him, I was still computer illiterate. But for heaven's sake, keep trying to get him on the phone. I can't imagine why he hasn't been available. Heather Green is, for the most part, a peaceful village. Obviously, you can't stay indoors forever, but neither can you live in constant terror of being thrown into empty swimming pools by a perpetrator unknown. Using your son-in-law St. John's veterinarian tranquilizer gun to defend yourself was an inspiration. But if you go round firing it off by mistake like that, the whole of Shagthorne, both little and great, will be asleep. How is your poor son Howard now? It is the weekend here in Australia. I suppose it is in England too, but once again I feel so far away, which I am, that I find it hard to imagine that it still exists. Thank heavens for the email, such a lifeline. My daughter Leslie and her partner Brian have gone away for a couple of days, leaving me with the usual expressed breast milk in the fridge and in sole charge of my 2 granddaughters. Leslie and Brian have been having problems, apparently, and need to be alone to remind themselves quite what they saw in each other in the first place. Honestly, if they can't remember after this short time, what on earth are their memories going to be like when they get to our age? And how terrible to break up Brian's marriage and then wonder if they'd done the right thing. But that's typical of Leslie. She's always been faddy. Sometimes I wonder if our generation wasn't so elated that the war was over and so determined that our children should inherit a brave new world with free this and free that. All we succeeded in doing was to spoil them and give them unreasonable expectations of life. I mean, what would Winston Churchill make of things if he was still with us? He must be rolling in his grave. Baby Bubbles is crying for a 4 a.m. feed, so I must stop. I'm exhausted but can't seem to sleep. Too much worry. The good news, though, is that the airline have finally found my luggage. It wasn't in Kuala Lumpur, but Helsinki, so at least I now recognise myself when I look in the mirror. I looked a real sight in Leslie's crop tops. Reply soon, old friend. I'm so lonely. Love, Irene.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, your email made my heart bleed. Oh, I do so know what you mean about being lonely. Sometimes it's at its worst when you're in the bosom of your family. I said as much straight to camera on Dale's TV's A Life with Sheep yesterday. The camera crew were almost in tears. Howard was furious with me. I'd come out for a visit. I'd love to see Oz after all your tales, though St. Urban doesn't sound quite as exotic as India, but I'm absolutely indispensable here. My daughter Karen's in hospital for the foreseeable future. She made so much fuss about privacy, they've moved her to her own room, for which, of course, St. John is paying. He, poor lamb, is rushed off his feet with 2 veterinarian surgeries a day and all the outreach visits. He's had to go back several times to see my son Howard and his partner Anthony's surrogate mother. Trouble with the syringe or something, but the good news is they are at last pregnant. Howard is over the moon. Now he and Anthony are arguing about which of their little squiggles did it. As they've got a result, TV parlance, and everyone's smiling again, Dale's TV are back. The director, a nice lad despite his stubble, said I was wasted behind the scenes and I should get in front of the camera. I took to it like a natural. I don't know that I've ever confided to you, but when I was a girl I longed to tread the boards. Of course, my father would never have tolerated it. To him an actress was no different from a prostitute. It was only because his local pub was called the Nell Gwyn. It was a notorious haunt of ladies of the night. I often wondered if he felt so strongly about them why he went there. Now, Irene, I'm saying this for your own good. Do not go back to the bottle. No matter how desperate you feel, resist it, old friend, or it's not only Winston Churchill who'll be rolling around in his grave. I know he's one of your heroes, but there are some of his footsteps in which you wouldn't want to follow. Needless to say, I mean the above in a loving, caring way. Your own Vera.
Karen at greatshag.com. Dear Leslie, what's happening with boring Brian? Have you made it up or kicked him out? Things have improved in here since I got the private room. I'm allowed to move about as long as I don't leave the hospital. As if. I can't bear the idea of going back to the bothy. It's too full of St. John and the bloody kids. Seriously thinking of running away as soon as I've dumped this one. They'd be much happier with Ma looking after them. Of course, she loves it, keeps going on about being needed. Send us a mail soon. I'm so bored. Karen.
Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera, you may down-cry Sir Winston all you like, but just ask yourself in a quiet moment what he would have said about your son-in-law St. John, who, lest we forget, is a vet, not a gynecologist, impregnating a paid stranger on television with a syringe full of semen from 2 homosexuals, one of which is your own son, so that she may bring forth this strange fruit and hand it over for cash to said deviants to bring up. Personally, I would fight them on the beaches every time. Instead, you encourage it. And you say that the good news is that they've succeeded. Call me old-fashioned if you will, but who can the little mite call mother when it's born? Meanwhile, here in Melbourne, I'm having to cope with a new granddaughter born out of wedlock because my daughter Leslie couldn't keep her hands off another woman's husband. I'm just left feeling that the more time goes by, the more of my life seems to have been in vain. However, nil desperado Irene has always been my battle cry, and to this end I managed to have a good long chat with Brian, Leslie's partner, the other evening, on our own while Leslie was resting. Though goodness knows what she's got to be tired about, I seem to be the only one to notice when little Bubbles needs feeding or changing. But back to my main thrust. I managed finally, after some subtle hyperbole, thank heavens for my creative writing course, to fire Brian up enough to promise to push through his divorce with all his vim and vigour to a speedy conclusion. I made him hold little Bubbles in his arms and swear on her dear little golden head that he would make her legitimate, albeit retrospectfully. He's been out and bought Leslie a socking great engagement ring at vast expense, which he showed me today in secret, with tears in his eyes, and he's going to propose officially at the weekend. This, Vera, is what I think of as the role of the responsible mother, whatever her age, guiding her children towards a more wholesome lifestyle, not giddily encouraging them to go their own way as you do with yours. For instance, if a son of mine had told me he was gay in his confused early years, I would have explained to him that it was just a whim and not something that had to be acted upon. I would have reminded him of those old-fashioned notions, willpower and self-denial. I would have introduced him to every eligible girl within a 50-mile radius of Great Shagthorn, and if they had failed to raise a response, I would have told him just to keep his hand on his halfpenny. One thing I would definitely not have done would be to egg him on about artificial insemination, but that is obviously where we differ. Once more, I shall gloss over your allusions to my so-called drinking habit. Honestly, talk about the pot calling the kettle. You may have chosen to forget who it was who had 17 long, slow screws in my Yorker when we were on our tour of Europe, but I certainly haven't. Nor have I forgotten the consequences, but I shall not go down that alley just now. I shall merely say Manolo and leave you to weave your way unsteadily down memory lane. Naturally, it goes without saying that I too mean everything aforementioned in the most loving and caring way. But of course, a lot of your behaviour clicks into place. Now I know your father frequented a bawdy house. Nobody would argue that it was a nice beginning for you, Vera, but if you're determined to try, you can rise above the nasty bits in your gene pool. With all loving and friendly wishes, Irene.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, you know where you can stuff your loving and friendly wishes. Vera.
Karen at greatshag.com. Dear Leslie, I hear you're going to marry boring Brian after all. Ma showed me a rambling email Irene had sent her when she'd obviously had a few tinnies too many. We noticed she was back on the sauce when she was here. Anyway, girl, she reckons Brian's bought you a socking great engagement ring. So don't go giving him back to his wife till you've got it safely on your finger. I haven't got a wedding ring on mine anymore. My finger had puffed up like a black pudding and the triage nurse had to sew it off. Ring, not finger. Think it's an omen? Brett, the triage nurse, is a mate of Howard and Anthony's and a real pet. Pops in to share a spliff and has promised to sneak me some pharmaceutical Charlie. St. John won't give me Class A's and has even tried to get me off the weed while I'm sprogging. A sanctimonious bastard. Karen.
Howard and Anthony at sheepshag.com. Dear Irene, my mother showed me your last email, which had us all in tears. Anthony and I were shocked to the fundament at your medieval attitudes. Haven't you ever watched Queer as Folk? Not that Great Shagthorn is exactly a gay village. More's the pity. Your comments were especially hurtful after the way we've always welcomed you here. Last time, if I remember rightly, you said we were gorgeous boys and you wished we were your sons. You even encouraged us to try for adoption, saying why not? We were just like a married couple. Of course, by then you had had the greater part of 2 bottles of Sheepdipper's Chardonnay. We can only conclude you've joined that band of losers darling Tony Blair calls the forces of conservatism who read The Sun and are deeply homophobic. Age is no excuse for embracing the attitudes of Hitler, even if the last war is still your yardstick. Mother may have other foibles, but she's remarkably open and tolerant about sex. things she told us about your travels together, which at the time we were inclined to disbelieve, now make perfect sense. The only Manolo she remembers, by the way, was a bartender over whom you threw a jug of sangria. I dare say you will find excuses for all of this, but they will fall on deaf ears at Sheep Dippers. It's such a pity, as we were going to invite you to be godmother to our baby when he/she is born. But now we're going to get a lesbian friend from Stonewall. Howard.
Dear Vera and Howard, got your emails and I'm in a torment of retribution. I read mine again. Think I went over the top. Please forget and forgive. Don't know what got into me. If I had a hair shirt, I'd be wearing it. Sometimes I wonder if I'm not a little bit depressed. Yours, penitentiarily, Irene. Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera and Howard, I have been in a torment of agony since I emailed my apology to you both a few days ago, and having heard nothing in return. Did you get the flowers I sent yet, Howard? And Vera, have you received the cookery book I found for you, 101 Ways to Serve Kangaroo Imaginatively? I'm not fishing for gratitude, merely checking. As always, I have found some solace in the creative arts, and send you this poem which woke me up in the middle of the night, demanding to be penned. I hope and pray that it may go some way to stop me being a persona non gratis in your eyes. I really do value our friendship, and hope and pray that it does not continue to be erstwhile. With a heart filled with shame, Irene. An Ode by Irene Spencer. They say that all the world's a stage, and we mere players on it. So your humble servant, I, Irene, give you this modest sonnet. I wish that I could turn back time and have never ever sent the email, writ impulsively, in which my rage was spent. Dear Vera Small, and Howard too, that sweet fruit of your loins, if apologies were money, I would shower you both with coins. Please look at me with love again, and don't be filled with hate. Excuses are empty, as I know, but I've not been too well of late.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, I have pondered long and hard on whether to accept your apology, albeit put off by the appalling doggerel. I do hope you're not throwing good money away on this creative writing course. I was in such a quandary about it, I even emailed my global network for advice. It seems to have struck a chord. I downloaded lots of replies. Obviously a plethora of people feel abused by their so-called friends. My Indian pals Raj and Shiva, boys at bumchums.com, think I should definitely forgive you. They say it will bring me good karma. But there again, every beggar in India will promise you that for 20 rupees. Yasmin, remember Yasmin, my next-door neighbour on the trailer park, psychic at farshores.com, gave you an absent tarot reading and came up with the Queen of Cups. She's the one holding a large wine glass and surrounded by flagons. She says to leave that with you. Even silly old Edward Blunt, your erstwhile suitor, Blunt at foulshag.com, stuck in his oar, or should I say straw. He says you've kept your hand on your own halfpenny for so long, I've no idea how he knows. You haven't noticed there's been devaluation. After many sleepless nights, answering the dratted email, I finally decided to excuse your behaviour. It is, as our long history demonstrates, ingrained in my nature. Besides, I know the sort of things you get up to when you're depressed, and I couldn't bear to have that on my conscience. My son Howard and his partner Anthony say thank you for the bouquet of birds of paradise. They're an outlandish sight in Great Shagthorn, but I dare say they are common or garden, perhaps literally, in Australia. Anyway, they have pride of place by the four-poster bed in a heritage-style milking bucket, and the boys say to tell you they had a lot of fun with the spiky bits. I'm enclosing a booklet my granddaughter Sabrina brought home from school on sex education, which reminds me 101 Ways with a Kangaroo went straight in the bin. If this explanatory little work persuades playground bullies to behave like fully functioning citizens, which I doubt, Sabrina is called all sorts of names because she has short hair and likes football, it may have the same effect on you. At least it will provide an alternative to your blind, cliché-ridden prejudices. All for now. Must stop and do something important, like work on my recipe book proposal. I advise you to do something practical next time you feel a poem coming on. Vera.
Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera, thank you for your email at last. I can't tell you how relieved I am that we are speaking again. And thank you for the very informative booklet on sex education. I learnt more perusing that for half an hour than I have hitherto learnt in a lifetime. I'm rather cross with Edward Blunt, though, for being so indiscreet on my behalf. And, as always, there are two sides to that story. All I was after was friendship, but it appears he had other things on his mind which I kept trying to ignore. You remember finding his truss in your apartment after I'd been staying there. I'd just popped out to make some tea, and when I returned to the living room, he was in his birthday suit, lolling on the chaise lounge. I was so shocked I dropped his cup in his lap, hence, after a lot of agonised hopping about and blue language, his hasty departure, and forgetfulness in the underwear department. I'm not normally prone to depression, as you know, except when I'm in Australia. It seems I travel all those thousands of miles each time just to be ignored by my daughter and treated like a maid of all work. Of course, it's wonderful to see my grandchildren, just not every minute of every day. I have been worrying, too, about the mystery man stalker that I left behind me in Blighty. My next-door neighbour Beryl wrote to me last week, telling me she'd seen him again hanging around my house. Did you ever get to speak to DC Hogg of Heather Green CID? Do please try again if you haven't. Please give my love to Howard and Anthony, and say I'm glad they like the flowers. You don't mention if you tried making any of the dishes before you binned the kangaroo book. Heavens, you must have been cross with me. I've never known you look a gift horse in the mouth before. Baby Bubbles is crying to be changed, and it's almost time to collect Cheryl Marie from school, so I'll have to finish. Yours in haste and heartfelt gratitude, Irene, XX.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, I've been wondering what had happened to the mystery man. I haven't seen him at all since the swimming pool incident. In fact, I've rather missed him. I felt we'd established a bond. I tried DC Hogg again, but although I left another message, he didn't return my call. No wonder the police are always calling for extra resources. So I dropped the enclosed note to him. I'm so glad you discovered the truth about Edward Blunt before you got too involved. I didn't like to say so before, but I had a similar problem with him. We'd been to a countryside alliance rally where Edward was making a speech in support of fox hunting. He is, when all's said and done, a poultry farmer. Edward got carried away with all the cheering and backslapping and waving of the St. George's flag, and when taking me home threw me on my back in the poultry van and attempted to have his way with me. Fortunately, he'd had one too many old peculiars, and I was able to fend him off quite easily. I shoved a knee in his crutch, hence the truss, and crowned him with a chicken basket. While he was rolling around in foul droppings, I gave him a piece of my mind. And whatever he said, that's all I gave him. I'm afraid he spends too much time with his cockerels. Must stop now and do the washing, ironing, gardening and cooking, while Sabrina is at school and Nelson is tied to his playpen. We had to stop using the baby bouncer. His legs are so long he kept hitting the ceiling. No time for depression. Love, Vera. P.S. Retrieved the kangaroo book from the bin and experimented with braised sweetbreads. We found it more of a snack than a meal. Perhaps on a kangaroo they are larger. The Coach House Apartment, The Bothy, Long Lane, Little Shagthorn, Darbs. Dear D.C. Hogg, you may have been puzzled by the string of expletives left on your voicemail, but having tried many times to contact you by telephone, I'm afraid I was overcome by frustration. I was calling on behalf of my old acquaintance Irene Spencer, who claims she was being plagued by a mystery man stalker before her recent departure for Australia. I, too, have had sightings of this mystery man in my home village of Little Shagthorn, and am therefore in a position to give you an unbiased description. He is tall, in the prime of life, about 40, with a youthful complexion, golden locks, and a lovely smile. Far from being threatening, he is kind and chivalrous. Indeed, I was rescued by him from an unfortunate accident. If it hadn't been for his prompt action, I might have languished at the bottom of a muddy pit for days. But like a prince in a fairy tale, he disappeared before I could thank him. I understand, though one has to take everything Irene says with a pinch of salt, he has been sighted back in Heather Green. If you can fit reading this letter and apprehending him into your busy schedule, I'd like to be the first to know. Do please contact me at the above address if I can be of further assistance. Yours very sincerely, Vera Small.
Irene at osmail.com. Dear Vera, Karen and St. John and little Sabrina and baby boy Nelson, Howard and Anthony, rejoice, rejoice. My daughter Leslie is finally engaged to be married to Mr. Brian Benbow of St. Urban, Melbourne. Excitedly yours, proud mum Irene, XXXXXXX.
Room 6, Blair Ward, Princess Diana Memorial Wing, Great Shagthorn Cottage Hospital. Dear Irene, penning a quick notelet while waiting for Karen to come round from anaesthetic. She was safely delivered of a little girl at 4 a.m. this morning. St. John was woken at 2 a.m. by an emergency call, and we rushed to the hospital to watch them perform a caesarean section. Fascinating. Karen made a great fuss, howling and thrashing, and when St. John offered her his hand, she bit it. I pointed out to her that it would be a great deal worse if she had to go through proper labour. As it was, the triage nurse gave her an injection which knocked her out, and all she has to deal with is a few stitches. As the baby is so premature, she was taken straight to an incubator. Fortunately, they still have them in the private wing. She's absolutely sweet, though very small, not a bit like Nelson. So, my dear, we both have reason to celebrate. I'm so pleased for you that Leslie is engaged at last. I've read between the lines and know that with your straight-laced views you found the situation there humiliating and embarrassing. When exactly are they getting married? Anyway, St. John, Howard and I send congratulations, as will Karen when she surfaces. Oh, I can hear some stirrings from the bed. Oh, it was just Karen demanding another injection. I managed to tell her Leslie's news, but all she said was poor cow. When I asked her if she'd thought of an appropriate name for the baby, she muttered F-word millennium. Of course, she's still very groggy. If she sticks to it, we'll all call the little scrap Millie. Lots of love from all of us to all of you. Kiss, kiss, Vera.
Irene at osmail.com. Congratulations, Granny Small, you've done it again. Leslie's wedding, 13th of next month. I'm so excited. You're all invited. Would love to have you over to help with the catering if Karen can spare you. Lots of love, Irene X. On the Birth of Your New Baby by Irene Spencer. Congratulations, Karen dear. Sing ho, sing high, sing hey. For unto you is born a girl this bright and sunny day. May blessings fall upon your heads and all your dreams come true. These flowers and these kisses are with love from me to you. Irene XX. Irene at osmail.com. Vera, wedding off. Don't come. I'm in despair. Irene.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, I'm so excited about your daughter's wedding in Australia, too. Every time I look at Vera's Voyages on my email address, I think it's high time I went on another one. I could certainly do with a break from the bothy. I work 14 hours without even the minimum wage. Gone are the days when being over 60 meant welcome retirement. My daughter Karen won't be able to come, much as she'd like to, as she has to stay and feed little Millie, who's still in the incubator. Karen's grumbling that she's nothing but a milking machine. Her husband St. John can't take the time off, and my grandson Nelson is far too much of a handful, so it'll be just me and my granddaughter Sabrina. I'll have to get a full fare ticket for her. She's so tall and tomboyish you won't recognise her. Hope I'll be able to persuade her out of her football boots for the wedding. Later, have searched the World Wide Web for travel arrangements and come up with bomb.com, which is offering flights at miraculously low prices. All being well, Sabrina and I will be with you on the 10th, in good time for me to give you a hand with the catering. In the meantime, I've attached a favourite recipe. You should be able to get the ingredients, and it's ever so easy. Even for an amateur. Lots of love, Vera. Curried bananas. Bananas, ginger wine, garlic, chilli powder. Marinate bananas overnight, then pop in the oven for 20 minutes. Or, if you're feeling brave, flambe.
Karen at greatshag.com. Dear Leslie, gutted I won't be at your wedding. Are you sure you know what you're doing? I said keep the ring, not Brian. Anyway, lots of luck, girl. Karen.
Leslie at osmail.com. Dear Karen, what are you going on about? I have kept the ring and dumped Brian. Mum's going demented about it. So what else is new? Leslie, X.
Irene at osmail.com. Vera, didn't you get my last email? I said the wedding's off and not to come. Don't tell me you've bought your tickets already or I'll never forgive myself. Reply immediately, marked urgent. I need to know whether to worry or not. Yours in desperation of newfangled methods of so-called communication, Irene.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Urgent. Dear Irene. No, I didn't get your last email. Are you sure it wasn't in your return mail? My recipe book proposal came back saying service undeliverable. So, taking advantage of the remarkable discounts offered on the net, I booked and paid for the plane tickets. Needless to say, bomb.com won't consider a refund. I'm sure it's not Brian who's called it off after all he's promised. Don't you think your daughter Leslie's just having an attack of pre-wedding jitters? She probably needs a good talking to about shouldering her responsibilities, and I'm sure between us we can deliver it. There's baby Bubbles to consider, to say nothing of the trouble and expense all their guests have been to. I've spent a fortune on a hyacinth pink silk two-piece with matching petal hat. Of course I'll get the wear out of it on my next Dale's TV appearance, but still. So, we'll be with you on the 10th as planned. I shall copy and paste this into my letter format now and put it in the post to be absolutely sure you get it. You're quite right. No matter how despised by modernisers, the tried and trusted methods are best. Love from us all, and a bracing thump for Leslie, V.
My bedroom, Byron Street, St. Urban, Melbourne, Australia. Dear Vera, by the time you read this, you will be sitting here in my bedroom, and I will be on a plane back to Blighty. Tried emailing and phoning to stop you, but you'd already left Little Shagthorn. Why on earth did you think it would take you 2 days to get to the airport? I've heard of leaving in plenty of time, but really? Have had an absolute bombshell dropped into my life. See attached letter from Beryl next door in Heather Green. She always goes in to water plants when I'm away, and to switch lights on and off and open and close curtains in a stimulation of me being in residence. Don't know what I'm going to walk into when I get back. My poor little house. Now tell me I was overreacting about the mystery man stalker if you dare. But character judgment has never been your greatest strength. No time now. I'm flinging things in suitcase as I write, hence the scribble. Make yourself completely at home while you're here. What's mine is yours, as you know, which most likely, if I know my daughter Leslie, will mean full childcare duties and all housekeeping, cleaning and cooking. See if you can drum some sense into her about marrying Brian, and feel absolutely free to deliver that bracing thump you mentioned in your last. Ill wind! Had a small win on Tats Lotto this week, Australia's national lottery, so will be buying myself a computer when I pass through Kuala Lumpur duty-free on my way home. We'll let you know my new email address, and you should get Leslie to give you one while you're here. Love to Sabrina. Little Cheryl Marie is dying to meet her. More soon, in haste and trepidation, Irene. Fort to the Limes, Heather Green. Dear Irene, I'm ever so sorry to tell you you've been broken into. I was taken badly again and had to go into hospital for a couple of days with my bottom, so wasn't doing the usual with the curtains and lights. Got back to a bomb site. Police got your door boarded up. It had been kicked in. Your telly's gone, and your video, but I can't tell what else as it's such a mess. I'm sending you the red notice from the border-uppers. They've been round in person to try to get their money from me, but I couldn't afford to pay them on my pension. Apparently they got let down a lot, what with the police calling them in and then people not paying, so their new company policy is to rip the boarding down again if they don't get their money within a week. Can you come home? Otherwise, I may as well put a notice up over your door telling people to help themselves, let alone the weather coming into your lounge. Haven't told you the worst. That chap who I've seen hanging around and who roped through your dustbin that time was seen running off after the break-in by Betty Slapper up the street. Last night, coming home from bingo, I saw him and screamed burglar. Instead of running away, he came over, bold as brass, and said to tell you he's got your stuff in safekeeping. Have told police, and they're waiting for a ransom notice. They're flummoxed. They've never heard of a telly being kidnapped before. Can you bring me cherry brandy from duty-free this time? I've gone off Midori. Yours faithfully, Beryl next door.
Vera's Voyages at osmail.com. Dear St. John and Karen, amazed to arrive and find Irene already gone. Rather put out after a 3-day journey. No wonder bomb.com was so insistent about getting to the airport early. It was like a rugger scrum to get onto the plane. Then we had to wait while they put the door back on. Irene had left a note insisting that she'd try to email and phone about her change of plans, but as Leslie has subsequently confided, owing to a recurrence of her old trouble, she is getting increasingly forgetful. Apparently she is now convinced that her mystery man stalker has broken into her home and stolen her video for ransom purposes. It seems unlikely. I await her next communication with dread. Goodness knows what fanciful explanation she'll dream up. In the meantime, Leslie has made us very welcome. What a charming girl she is, not a bit like Irene's descriptions of her. I can see exactly why she doesn't want to marry Brian. He's fat and bald and 20 years her senior. More importantly, his .com shares have taken a nosedive, and what with the alimony he has to pay, he's unable to provide Leslie with any of the promised comforts. She has kept the engagement ring, a large solitaire, and the hot tub in the garden. We've all had a lot of fun in that, though Sabrina does like to play rough with Cheryl Marie. Must stop, I can hear splashing and screaming from the garden. Later. Sabrina was holding Cheryl Marie's head under water again. Although they're the same age, Cheryl Marie is tiny and very feminine, and of course she wasn't brought up on a trailer park. Baby Bubbles is going to be another little beauty. She's as good as her golden hair. She obviously doesn't get that from Brian, and much less demanding than my grandson Nelson. Hope you're not finding looking after him too arduous, Karen. Still, you got plenty of rest lying on your back for a month in hospital. All love, V/Mother.
Leslie at osmail.com. Karen, what the bloody hell is going on? Just got rid of my mum and yours polls up to stay. Do something. Mum's found out she's been burgled at home and was like a headless chicken till she left. Couldn't stand it anymore, so made some hash cookies to calm her down. Of course, she's one of the tiny few it just makes hyper and paranoid, and I ended up wishing I hadn't bothered. She was practically climbing the walls. Suppose I should have learned my lesson last time she had some of my dope by mistake and I had to put her in the loony bin. Seriously, if your mother's thinking of staying here, I'm coming over to you. I'd got a new bloke I'd been gagging for lined up for tonight, and I thought at last I could bring him home. Yours, demented. I swear to God it's catching. Leslie.
Irene at thelimes.heathergreen.com. Dear Leslie, Vera, Cheryl Marie, Bubbles and Sabrina, how very odd to be writing to you all together. Arrived home in a chaos of emotion, having flown for 24 sleepless hours, completely wide awake and rigid with tension. Couldn't eat a thing on the plane, it all looked as if it would poison me. Thank heavens for those delicious little Mary Warner cakes you sent me off with, Leslie, otherwise I might have starved. You must show the recipe to Vera and see if she wants to include it in her book. Got here wrung out, dreading worst, finding the inexplicable. Too tired to go into it now, but wanted to let you have my new email address. Bought smashing little laptop, marvellous price, thoroughly recommend Chung Chang's cheap computers in Kuala Lumpur duty-free. Must sleep. Can't go on any longer. Would love to tell you of miracle and coming home to dream instead of nightmare, but I'm still feeling strange. So good to have the blood back in my legs, though. I could feel the benefit as soon as we were on the right side of the equator. Got to stop. Eyes closing. Neck like red-hot poker. Love, Irene/mum/granny. XXXZZZZZ.
Vera's Voyages at osmail.com. Dear Irene, the blood certainly rushed to my head on receipt of an email from my son-in-law, St. John. My daughter Karen has absconded with the triage nurse. Poor little Millie is an abandoned child before she's out of the incubator. Don't talk to me about chaos of emotion. St. John, with his schedule, has to rush to the hospital several times a day to feed the poor little mite with expressed breast milk. I only hope he remembers to defrost it. Baby Nelson has had to be farmed out to my son Howard and his partner Anthony on their sheep farm. Goodness knows how they'll manage with a herd of sheep as well. Looking after Nelson is a full-time job. Still, I suppose it'll be good practice for when they get their own baby. As you can imagine, I was poleaxed, but lovely Leslie came to the rescue. She said much as she would miss me, I was obviously needed at home straight away. She rushed around organising flights, has done all our packing, and is now in the kitchen baking some Mary Warner cakes for the journey. She says to send you her love and tell you she'll give me the recipe. Love, except I'll probably never feel it again. Especially for Karen, Vera.
Karen at globetrotter.com. Dear Leslie, well, you did say do something. Love, Karen.
Irene at thelimes.heathergreen.com. Dear Vera, trust you are safely ensconced back at Little Shagthorn now and have taken control of the family situation. Has anybody heard from your daughter Karen yet? Imagine being able to abandon a newborn baby. She must be completely distraught about something. She's normally such a lovely girl. I find it hard to believe that she is in any kind of romantic entanglement with the triage nurse who disappeared with her. He's a friend of your son Howard and his partner Anthony, isn't he? So surely he's of the other persuasion. Perhaps they've just gone shopping. I have been having shock after shock back home in Heather Green. I returned, as you know, expecting to find mayhem after Beryl next door's letter telling me about the break-in. And instead I found everything looking lovely. The front door had been put back on its hinges, everywhere had been hoovered and dusted, and there was the most wonderful flower arrangement from Flora's Tributes, very posh florist in nearby Monkston Magnar. Naturally, I assumed it was Beryl I had to thank, so imagine my surprise, not to mention utter discombobulation, when I took a cherry brandy round to thank her and she said that all she had done was to let the cleaners in. What cleaners, I hear you ask, as indeed did I. The cleaners you arranged to come in and tidy up, she said. She's a nice woman, but very simple. But I sent no cleaners, said I, and Vera, I didn't. I've emailed your son-in-law St. John, as it's just the sort of kind thing he would arrange, but he replied saying it wasn't him. He does sound lost without Karen. Do please give him a motherly hug from me. I've been all round the village asking, but nobody knows a thing. I even emailed Edward Blunt, our one-time would-be poultry farming paramour, wondering if he might perhaps be refining his seduction techniques, but he just sent me a foul reply, if you'll forgive the pun, saying that cleaning was what women are for. I won't pass on what he went on to say that men are supposed to be for, but suffice it to say it's nothing useful in the housekeeping department. I am now left with the unlikely scenario that I was broken into and burgled by the mystery man stalker who Beryl saw hanging around my back entrance, and then cleaned up again by person or persons unknown, as D.C. Hogg has filed in his report. My TV and video are still missing, as is, most upsettingly, my wedding photo. Why would they want that, other than to be hurtful? They'd get nothing for it, the frame wasn't even antique. I told you, didn't I, that Beryl saw the mystery man on her way back from bingo, and he told her he had my things in safe keeping. Since this is the most dramatic crime Heather Green has ever known, CID have wired me for sound, and I am supposed to go about my business wearing a little microphone in my lapel and a battery pack strapped to my thigh in case he approaches me. It makes walking very awkward and crossing my legs an impossibility. And it's all very well for Hogg and his associates to get excited about it. They keep talking about offering to meet him in a field in just their underpants. What is it about men? But I feel like a lonely little lamb who's been put out as a lure for the big bad wolf. I carry a Jif lemon with me now wherever I go in case of attack. Anyway, dear, enough about me and my worries. Poor you, going all the way to Australia and then having to turn round and come straight back. You must be exhausted. Not to mention being terrified about the welfare of your missing daughter. If there's anything I can do to help find her, particularly now that I'm wired for sound, don't hesitate to let me know. But for all our worries, isn't it nice to be back home in Blighty? Much love, Irene, X.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, I'm sorry to have been a while replying, but what with unpacking, washing, cleaning, and the computer being down, something about brown ale being spilled on it, everything's been more topsy-turvy since I got back than when I was in Australia. Far from the cleaners having been in, the whole of the bothy was strewn with takeaway cartons, empty beer bottles and cigarette butts, which is odd, as St. John isn't a smoker. There were discarded clothes everywhere, all the beds had been used, and the sheets and pillows thrown all over the place. Quite honestly, if it had been anyone but St. John, I'd suspect there'd been an orgy. His explanation is that he didn't have time to change the beds, so just took it in turns to sleep in them. A mother-in-law's job is never done, and jet-lagged as I was, I had to get straight to the hoovering. Fortunately, the return journey was a lot faster with Ripper No Frills Airline, which was just as well, as they took no frills to the limit and didn't provide any lavatories or sustenance. I'd just popped the last Mary Warner cake into my mouth. They really are delicious. I'll be trying out the recipe when we put down in Dubai for a stopover in their fabulous duty-free. I wandered, entranced by the multicoloured garments and mouth-watering scents, and found myself buying a cornucopia of presents. My granddaughter Sabrina got a David Beckham football cap, complete with streaked blonde floppy hair extensions. She thought it looked funny perched on top of her head, but as I pointed out, no funnier than it used to do on his. While I stocked up on the exotic foods and herbs I didn't have a chance to buy in St. Urban. With enough tots at home to open a nursery, I went completely overboard on the designer baby clothes. They had the most marvellous accessories as well, and I couldn't resist some fluffy pale pink and blue pashminas. My son Howard and his partner Anthony claimed them both straight away on the grounds that their baby-to-be might be either sex, but later I saw them wearing them in Great Shagthorne Tesco's. No word at all from Karen, and the boys are absolutely mystified. Howard's convinced their friend Brett, the triage nurse she's run off with, is anything but straight. And what's more, he's got the photos to prove it. Apparently, the local tourist board has been running a campaign to promote Great Shagthorne as the gay capital of the Dales, and as part of a Mardi Gras weekend, Dales TV ran a take-home-a-tranny competition. Brett took first prize, impersonating Posh Spice, wearing a mini-slip he'd made himself from £50 notes. As Howard said, goodness knows how he managed that on the pay of a triage nurse. I've taken over the care of my granddaughter, little Millie, now she's allowed out of the incubator for a few hours. Anthony's made her a darling little sheepskin papoose, and it's the envy of all the other mothers. I've just come back from a brisk trot in the hospital grounds with baby Millie on my back, Pitbull Terrier Rex on his lead, and grandson Nelson in his pushchair. At this rate, I'll never need to take up yoga. I do hope you've solved the Heather Green mysteries. Sounds like one for your creative writing course, doesn't it? I'm sure you don't miss the wedding photo, but you must be lost without your TV and video. Mail me soon with the next instalment. I'm hooked. Love, Vera. P.S. Do beware while you're wired for sound. Who on earth's on the other end when you're spending a penny?
Irene at thelimes.heathergreen.com. Dear Vera, thank you for your long and newsy email, albeit tardy. I had to get my dictionary out to understand half of what you were on about, and even now I am none the wiser for its hallucidation. What is a pashmina? You mentioned them before when you were in India, and I thought at the time perhaps it must be something to eat, given that that seems to be your preoccupation these days. But now I'm not so sure. As you say, Howard and Anthony have been wearing them to do the shopping. Likewise, tranny, which I always thought was slang for transistor radio. I remember that Leslie nagged us all through her teen years for one. Couldn't find it in the dictionary, so asked Beryl next door, and she said it's somebody like Danny LaRue. So, let me get this straight. Your gay son Howard says that his sister Karen has run off with Brett, the triage nurse who likes to wear ladies' dresses. No sign so far of the mystery man. I'm feeling a bit exposed because Beryl next door's back in hospital with her bottom. Don't ask, I did, and honestly, after a 2-hour monologue, I was heaving. So, if he did appear, there would be nobody to hear my screams. I know I'm supposed to be wired for sound, but it only works when I switch it on, otherwise the battery would run out, and the knob is in such an awkward position. I told you it's strapped to the inside of my thigh, didn't I? Frankly, I don't know how I'm supposed to turn it on casually without him noticing, while engaging him in conversation long enough for the police to respond. I mean, what would you think if a woman my age started fiddling up her skirt when she was talking to you? Don't feel you have to answer that, Vera. It was a rhetorical question. Insurance won't pay up for a replacement TV and video because they say they aren't stolen but kidnapped, so my evenings are very long at the moment. The radio is all very nice, of course, but it doesn't lull you into a stupor the same way as the telly, does it? I do hope your son-in-law St. John isn't playing fast and loose while Karen is missing. It's all very well him saying he kept switching beds, but the cigarette ends just don't add up, do they, if he's not a smoker? And what will happen to you if she never comes back? Rare is the man who would have his mother-in-law living with him if she didn't come as a part of the bridal package. Still, I suppose he'll keep you while you're useful to him, looking after the children. Anyway, dear, keep your chin up. Lots of love, Irene X.
Karen at globetrotter.com. Dear Leslie, don't let on to the old dears, but I'm staying with Brett and his boyfriend. I ran away to punish St. John. It was bad enough him forcing me to be healthy while I'm breastfeeding, but when I got home, I found suspicious signs, and made him admit over a bowl of bloody sheep's yoghurt that he'd been having an affair while I was in hospital. Don't know who with, except judging by the empty tinnies and fag ends in the trash bags, she's a chain-smoking alcoholic. God knows how Ma didn't notice, but she only sees what she wants to where he's concerned. Anyway, I chucked the yoghurt over his head, and I'm not going home until the bastard grovels. Brett says I'm suffering from postnatal depression, but fortunately he can lay his hands on just the substances to sort it. Having a high time. Hope you are too. Karen.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, in haste, as we are in the midst of another crisis. Howard and Anthony's baby mother, Natasha, has just arrived in tears, having been thrown out by her husband. I'm not surprised. I always thought he must be an odd man to allow her to do the job in the first place. Goodness knows why she came here instead of Sheep Dippers. I can only think she feels she has more of a relationship with St. John, or at least with his syringe. Incidentally, despite your unpleasant aspersions, St. John has explained perfectly reasonably that the mess at the bothy was as the result of a Dale's TV wrap party. More when I can think beyond extra bedding, Vera.
Irene at thelimes.heathergreen.com. Vera, get off the phone, or stop scurfing the web or whatever it is you're doing. I need to speak to you urgently. Was deadheading the flower arrangement from person or persons unknown, and found a card nestling in the petals, which I had hitherto overlooked. It says, Dear Mrs. Spencer, trust you find everything as you left it, minus the TV and video, of course. I shall call to see you on Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m, where I hope we will have a pleasant meeting to our mutual advantage. Yours truly, C. Thorogood. I can't get DC Hogg on the phone either, and I'm at my wit's end since it's 5 to 4 already. Help me! Too late. He's ringing the doorbell. I shall stay very quiet and not answer. Oh, no, he's looking through the letterbox straight at me. If there's no reply when you phone me, call Hogg and tell him to track down C. Thorogood immediately. Yours desperately, Irene.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Irene, have rung and rung as instructed in your last, but just get the engaged signal. Tried the operator, some cretin in a call centre, and eventually, after being rerouted via Glasgow, Milton Keynes, and for all I know another planet, discovered your phone is off the hook. My mind raced far and wide over the possibilities. Perhaps you're involved in a romantic encounter, during which you don't welcome disturbance. I dismissed that one immediately. Or maybe a struggle took place where the phone was dislodged, and you are, as I write, gagged and bound to a kitchen chair. Worst of all, you may have been murdered, and are now lying, strangled with your wire, or with blood gushing from a fatal wound, at the foot of your stairs. On second thoughts, it couldn't be the stairs. I've just remembered you live in a bungalow. You'll be glad to know this all rushed through my brain at the pace of what my granddaughter Sabrina calls a nanosecond, and I was straight away on the phone to DC Hogg, demanding he send in the instant response unit. As usual, he had his voicemail on. I suppose it is tea time, but I left a message he won't forget in a hurry. Dear, dear friend, how sorry I am you live so far away. Otherwise I would dash straight round myself with a dose of my veterinarian son-in-law St. John's animal tranquilizer. It has, as you know, proved a lifesaver on previous occasions. Hope this reaches you and does not merely languish in your email inbox until a social worker finds it. Please let me know at once what is happening. I'm sitting at the computer with everything crossed, and I'm in agony with cramp all over. V.
Irene at thelimes.heathergreen.com. Dear Vera, have finally recovered from the smoke bomb and finished cleaning up the house with Christopher's help. What on earth did you say to DC Hogg's voicemail? Whatever it was, he was taking no prisoners. There was me and Chris getting to know each other over a cup of tea and fondant fancies when a troop of uniformed officers in riot gear and breathing apparatus bashed down the door with a battering ram without even bothering to knock first, exploded some device that had us both choking and blinded, and when the smoke finally cleared and our eyes managed to reopen, there was Hogg in his underpants, standing in the doorway waving his truncheon. Naturally, I shall be lodging a formal complaint. The phone wasn't so much off the hook as ripped out of the wall. They cause absolute mayhem, trampling through the living room, turning over furniture and throwing things about. My weeping fig will certainly never be the same again. Still, I'm sure you meant well. All for now, as Chris is picking me up in a minute in his Jaguar to take me out to dinner, but I thought I'd better let you know I'm still alive. Just, best wishes, Irene.
Vera's Voyages at littleshag.com. Dear Irene, I'm sorry, I'm sure, if my prompt action on your behalf has caused offence, but your hysteria left me no option. As to the message I left for DC Hogg, at least it seems to have done the trick and got him off his voicemail. I didn't bother mentioning stalkers and flashers, but went straight to armed guerrilla and hostage situation. Your own instant response is, as usual, to misunderstand and misjudge the blameless motives of a true friend. Really, the phrase dog in a manger could have been invented for you. Which reminds me, with all the drama, I may have forgotten to tell you that Rex, my pit bull terrier, was shot last week by your ex-paramour Edward Blunt, who claimed he was worrying his chickens. I imagine they have more to worry about from Edward himself, but that's another story. As if that isn't enough, there have been terrible scenes between St. John, my son Howard and his partner Anthony, and Natasha, their surrogate mother. No one will tell me what's going on, and when I pressed Howard, who usually confides everything, he burst into tears and rushed away sobbing something about St. John's bloody insemination. The last row kept me awake till 5 o'clock this morning. It can't be good for Natasha when she's pregnant. She's moved into my daughter Karen's West Wing turret. Temporarily. Well, Irene, I'm relieved to know you're all right. But whom or what is this Christopher? Is he the mystery stalker? You give no explanation, and yet, after your alarmist missive, here you are on first-name terms, sharing fondant fancies. Were you wired for sound throughout the encounter? In which case, if you're too engrossed with dinner parties, you can simply send me the tape. Must stop. Rex has slipped his surgical restraint and is tearing round the garden after Sabrina's pet ferret. Love and good luck, Vera.
Dear Vera, who is Christopher indeed? Well, he is many things, marvellous things, heroic things, and also things of a personal nature which are very difficult to talk about. Where to start? Well, first, with the mystery of the kidnapped television and video. There I was, away from home in Australia, as you will remember, staying with the girl who calls me mother but who treats me like a slave, and Christopher, not knowing this, had come round to see me here at the Limes. He couldn't help noticing as he was walking up the path that there was a gaping hole where my front door used to be, and just as he was puzzling out why that might be, 2 boys ran out of it, knocking him to the ground and making off with my electrical goods. Thinking naught of his own safety, he immediately gave chase and miraculously caught up with them in Bolsover Close. It turned out that they were children of barely 10 years, so instead of turning them over to the police, he confiscated their booty and gave them a very severe talking to. On returning the stolen artefacts to my house, he deduced that I was not currently in residence and took them to his own home for safekeeping. Beryl, as we know, saw him leaving with them, didn't hear what he was telling her, and jumped to the erroneous conclusion that he was stealing them himself and holding them to ransom, hence all the misunderstandings. He did take my wedding photo, of course, but only to make a copy of it for himself. He's returned the original to me safe and sound. He it was who organised for the cleaners to go in so that my homecoming would be trauma-free. Yes, he is the mystery man-stalker. He had been following me merely in the hope of introducing himself at an opportune moment, but unfortunately one never arose. He even tracked me down to the bothy when I was staying there in lieu of you, which is how he came to pull you out of the swimming pool, but of course by then I'd left. Now we come to the difficult part, which I can barely bring myself to write. That which I have kept secret for so long, I now feel like shouting from the rooftops, for out of darkest shame has come shining glory. I can't go on in prose form. I need the subtle nuance of verse. The Ballad of Irene Spencer by Irene Spencer. Once there was a young girl of barely 17 who strived to be a credit by keeping herself clean. Alas, there was an accident. Alas, she caught her toe. For there were things in heaven and earth that she really didn't know. Of how the birds and bees were made, of the mysteries of life, and ignorance being no defence, her parents gave her strife. They wouldn't listen when she said it wasn't her but their friend Fred, that he had thrown her on the bed and sin had reared its ugly head, that she had begged, polite at first, but he had merely laughed and cursed, and as he was doing his wicked worst, what he called protection had gone and burst. Do not judge me, unlike them, or think that I was crude, for there hasn't been a day since then that I have not wept and rued that a baby grew inside my tummy, who never got to call me mummy, for he was taken from my side as soon as he was washed and dried. Perhaps you have guessed it, Vera. Christopher is my son, and he has found me at last. Yours, in a curious, heady admixture of shame and unbridled excitement, Irene.
Dear Irene, you think you've got drama, shame and guilt. We've had enough here to fill a novel by Dostoevsky. Sadly, I can't resort to versifying, and I must say your last had all the subtle nuance of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, so I will just enumerate the brutal facts. My daughter Karen turned up in the middle of the night and found her husband St. John up the turret with Natasha. My son Howard and his partner Anthony's baby is actually St. John's. Howard and Anthony aren't speaking to St. John. Karen beat up Natasha. Discovered my granddaughter Sabrina begging outside her school at Little Shagthorne. She had her brother Nelson in his stroller, Rex, my pit bull terrier, on a string, and the lollipop lady Brenda in a headlock. I'm afraid I lost control and slapped her. She slapped me back and shouted she'd already made £5 and I was a stupid four-letter word to stop her. This, I suppose, is the famed language of the playground. All this just as Dale's TV is about to air the first episode of our documentary A Life with Sheep. There was supposed to be a do round here to celebrate it, but with nobody on speaking terms and Howard and Anthony constantly in tears, a wake would be more appropriate. I'm sorry, my dear, I haven't even commented on your astounding news. You must be on cloud 9. And to think I was the first to perceive Christopher's wonderful qualities. I look forward to meeting him again, now he's officially family. What am I saying? More family is the last thing either of us needs. All my love, V.
Dear Vera, so grateful that you could spare the time from the vivid saga of your problem family. It must take you back to your days in the trailer park to congratulate me on being reunited with my son after all these years. I'm sorry that recent events in your own life have turned you against the family. Personally, I'm more than delighted currently to be wrapped in the bosom of my own. By the by, did I mention that my daughter Leslie is getting married after all? Christopher and I are planning to fly out to Melbourne together for the wedding. Club class, his treat. I'd invite you to come along and help with the catering, but you must already be up to your armpits in the stew you're in at the moment, so I won't add to your burdens. Take care, my dear, with love from your blissfully happy and fulfilled friend, Irene.
Dear Irene, I'm a star. A Life with Sheep is a big hit. Karen and St. John are reunited. It's a long story, more when I have time off from dealing with all my congratulatory emails. Dale's TV has never had so many, and they all said how empathetic I was. Natasha has gone to live with Howard and Anthony until her baby is born. Best of all, I've been invited by Dale's TV to host my own morning programme. A magazine with a daily recipe insert. Perfect! Have a wonderful time in Oz. I'm far too busy to come anyway. Love to you all, Vera. P.S. Dale's TV say with my ebullient personality it would be good if I had a foil, someone less colourful and vibrant. So, when you return from Oz, how about it?